Good evening. Let the record show we have a quorum present and we'll get started. This afternoon we're dealing with the National Gallery, and I would invite the two people from to be brought in. Huh? Yeah. Most of the same thing, internal control and record keeping. Internal control.
Okay. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give this Honourable Legislative Assembly shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm the evidence I shall give this Honourable Legislative Assembly shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Good afternoon, Ms. Urquhart. And the first time you ask a question, just identify yourself by name and title so that the record will show. You just need to do it one time. We're dealing with the 2015-16 audit report on the National Gallery, and the committee has some questions that we'd like to ask you. Ms. Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to the two witnesses present. Just to give context to, I think, the questions that will be coming, I'm going to read directly from the audit report, highlighting the concerns that I think are at the top of the minds of members of this committee. It reads, as a result of our audit, we have discussed with management our concerns over the material uncertainty that has arisen because of the continuous years of net losses in operations of the gallery since 2012, when the operations expanded to the new gallery building, and the unfavorable current ratio and net cash flows used in operations, which are negative operating cash flows. There have been significant increases in operating costs arising from conducting business in the new gallery building, and it provides material uncertainty over the ability of the gallery to continue as a going concern. I say those to preface the question that most entities would like on their wish list new infrastructure. Everybody wants a new building. But usually when desiring a new building, there is a financial case made for it, usually within that entity's own operating books. It seems that that was not done, and perhaps there is a backstory behind how the gallery came to be in its current location. Was a business case made? Was it a decision taken by the board? What were the financial implications, and were there considerations for those financial implications? It seems at face value that none of that had been done. You simply got a new building, and since having that new building, as identified in the records, you have not proven the ability to afford that building. So perhaps you can illuminate this committee a little bit in terms of the background as well as the financial difficulties that for all intensive purposes, the National Gallery is having since moving into your new facilities?
Natalie Urquhart, Director of the National Gallery, thank you for the question. So the background of the building absolutely was a business plan made. I think we identified back in 2010. Bearing in mind, you'll remember that most of the building had been privately fundraised for over about 14 years. So we were at the point in 2010 that most of those private donations would have had to have been returned had we not moved forward with the building. We did identify to the present ministry at the time that we were working under that the business plan would need to look at bringing the gallery into better alignment with the other two the cultural organizations. I think at the time that we had, decided to move forward with the building, the National Gallery was on about $400,000 per year from government. That has continued up until this 2018 year when that has been amended. That is about half what the National Museum were receiving. So we've always been responsible for a public-private partnership since day one. We rely very heavily on the private sector and also through a series of fundraising events. So that does implicate the annual revenue that the gallery is able to earn because we are based on these fundraising models. We did flag that part of our business plan would be an increase to recognize the literally doubling in size of the building and operations. And one of the main reasons for building the building was to allow for the first time ever for a national art collection gallery for the people of the Cayman Islands, and also a major education centre. So it was deemed that this was a good time to move forward with that. I think you know that we do about 60 workshops and events every month that are free to the public, so that there was a real need and demand for this organisation to take it to the next level. The business plan is based, as I mentioned, on the government grants, private sponsorship through mainly education events. The model that we've served as well, we have to be flexible every year if we have to cut events if we don't receive that private sponsorship. We've made that very clear from day one to our ministry. And the year that we're particularly looking at, the 15-16 year, was a very tough year for us. I do want to put for the record that a large amount of the loss is depreciation on the new building, and certainly the years before, from 2012, 13, 14, the major amounts that we were looking at on paper is depreciation. So it's not a cash loss. We have brought this to the attention of our leadership over the last few years and looked at ways to diversify revenue. So we've now got a large events department in place. We're doing fundraising schemes that will bring in long-term revenue, like our new National Gallery book, which again was underwritten by a donor, which allows for all of that income to contribute to our annual revenue. And this year, looking back to the 2016-17 audit, paints a very different picture than the 15-16. Donations have increased, and we've also implemented new fundraising events to make a significant difference to that. That will be reflected in the audit that is coming up.
Just to follow up, you stated that a large part of the reason why you got the National Gallery new building in the first place came as a direct result of private financial donations and fundraising. Have you seen those private donations reduce or increase over the last 5 years?
It's fluctuated. Certainly at the time of the building, you'll remember we were building in 2010-11. We had a global recession that was starting to affect Cayman, but we saw donations from private companies affected later because we usually work on a 3-year giving cycle. But I think the building itself has brought an enormous amount of pride to the community, whether it's the people that come in and use it for the classes, the students, or the corporate sector that we work with. So that started to rebuild. It is a major amount of my time as director is going out there and seeking private partnerships, but also looking at these events that we're talking about. So we do a very large fundraiser called the Big Art Auction. That wasn't held in 2015-16 for various reasons. That was another sort of loss of contribution to that particular year. This past year, we've held 5 fundraising events in the 18-month period. And that's now bringing us back up to where we expect in our business plan.
Across the globe, national galleries usually are supported by patrons, sometimes called patrons of the arts, and they fill those gaps that help to manage operational costs against, of course, to your statement, the fluctuating level of donations that may be received. Can you state whether the National Gallery has a similar program of patrons that support the organization other than government? And if so, can you identify to this committee how many and perhaps the value of those patrons' contributions?
So I'll answer that in two separate sections, because we would call our corporate partners patrons if they are long-term supporters. So there are about 7 corporations in the Cayman Islands that have been funding education programs for over 10 years. Those would be repeat program donors. We did lose one of those in 2015-16, which is again partly for that loss because they redirected their philanthropic efforts away from the Cayman Islands, and that was State Street, who had been with us for about 10 years. The other major organizations that we've partnered with for many years are DART, Walkers, EY, Butterfield, Cayman National, and then various other programs with smaller donors like Scotiabank for pop-up. And this is all education programs. So one of the things that we did see in 2015-16 is also a drop-off in sponsorship of exhibitions. Now, exhibitions really are one big 3-month education program, but we find that the corporate sector like to fund longer-term child-based education. So all of our children's education is available for free as a result. In terms of individual patrons, we have 2 individual patrons. Patrons, as you mentioned, normally come through a board, a management board, and we're very keen in the National Gallery to ensure that our management board has a very diverse group of individuals. So it's not like a traditional art museum in New York or London, where a lot of the board of directors would be made up of high net worth individuals. Our board has a very different profile. There are, however, a couple of patrons on our board that do regularly contribute on an annual basis.
Mr. Chris?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Natalie. Welcome to the National Gallery. One of the things, as we were putting together the invitees for the Public Accounts Committee as part of our oversight responsibilities, one of the things I'm open for, since I know that these proceedings are carried publicly, is that the public and others at large will at least get a better understanding of what it is that the National Gallery does and the importance that it plays here in the Cayman Islands. And hopefully we can find some new additional, once people recognize sometimes what the challenges are, that maybe we can get other people to step up to the plate to also support what it is that you're doing. Because at the end of the day, the arts does have a place to play within our society and as part of continuing our own heritage and culture and so forth. One of the things I'm curious about, and just expanding on what my colleague from Prospect said, was in terms of the, getting more, external support. Because one of the things, it is a very wonderful building, and I suspect that more events will be out there, and I expect that maybe this year probably be better than the 2016 year. Is that what are some of the initiatives that you guys are now undertaking or doing to basically improve in terms of the donation and the revenue side of the business? Because at the end of the day, it still needs to, pay its own way. And ultimately, wherever the shortfall is, that is something that the public purse will have to pick up. So one of the things, we want to just make sure that we're comfortable, and if there's anything that we can also do to help, because at the end of the day, the purpose of this body here is to help in whatever way we can. Like, what initiatives you guys will be doing that you think will increase revenues and at least carry the National Gallery up to a point of break even?
Thank you, that's a wonderful question. Absolutely, we've been looking, really since, as we said before moving into the building, about how museums in the 21st century can be revenue generators in their own right, and you see a trend in this happening the world over. We've always, as I said, been sort of 50-50 public-private, and even with the increase that we've received this year, will still only be just around that equation. So we're very, very committed to expanding our revenue generation. One of the projects I briefly mentioned was looking into publications now. Museums are also meant to be academic research centers, and we want to provide incredible resources both for our young students in our schools in Cayman, but also all the way up to seniors. We do that through programs on a weekly basis, but we'd like to create sort of more tangible long-term publications that support Caymanian heritage and our Caymanian story. Our recent book project, we just launched the first ever art history of the Cayman Islands based on the National Collection. That is also a revenue generator because we were able to seek a patron to underwrite that, Mrs. Susan Oldie. So all of the funds, 100% of those funds, are going directly back into supporting programming. That's a great model for future revenue generation at the gallery. I think one of the challenges we have, though, because we have a very large education program, and I should state that we do provide an after-school program weekly for 120 students here and in Cayman Brac, and that's just one sample of the type of reach that the gallery has. That is all done free of charge. You know, we have discussed the model about starting to charge people entry, but we're really determined to make sure that there are no barriers for anyone in the Cayman Islands community to access this incredible resource. So we do not want to put a charge on the door if we can possibly help it. One day that maybe have to be considered, but certainly we'll try everything we can do now not to have that so. So these publication projects, expanding merchandising in the shop, we have a project that we're just about to launch, which is really based for gifts and tourism based on the artwork in the National Collection. Of course, some of that revenue needs to go back to the artists themselves, so we do have to consider that too. But really, one of the blocks to some of the ideas that we have for revenue generation is our staffing resources. So we had a part-time fundraising administrator for 6 months last year to try out whether that position would pay for itself and more, and it looked very positive. It means that one person can really go out there and look globally for fundraising, not just locally. Currently, I do most of the fundraising myself, and I'm also running the organization, so it's very challenging to put enough time and resources into building those new community partnerships with corporate and individual donors. So certainly looking at increasing a staff member there to help generate revenue. And then we have our events team. So we can only do as many events as the kind of 1.5 person team can manage at present, but we're looking at ways of maybe having people on retainer for larger events should we begin to expand those events. So those are just a couple of samples.
Just to follow up, Mr. Chairman. Clearly, and I thank you for your answers, obviously it suggests that efforts are being made to improve your financial position. And one of the similarities, if you will, and all of the witnesses today is that the National Gallery, the National Museum, the Cayman National Cultural Foundation are not-for-profit whose emphasis is preserving national identity and culture. Other similarities suggest that with your otherwise bare-bones staff, there are a number of people wearing a number of different hats, much like yourself, as you just explained. However, the challenges that the Auditor General found was both a lack of revenue to support the operations of the new gallery in its new building, as we've seen cost increase and revenues perhaps not keeping pace with that. I think you've identified, though, your efforts to improve that situation. But the other side of the coin is what the Auditor General defined as concerns regarding the completeness of cash receipts from donations and events and exhibition income. Basically, this tells me that it is a matter or question of how your books are presented and maintained. And for that, I asked the question, who is the National Gallery's bookkeeper, and what is that person's qualifications and or experience specific to financial management?
Very good question as well, and I would like to state for the record that this qualification is an annual qualification for charities globally. It's not a reflection of the way that the National Gallery manages its accounts. We would love to get rid of this qualification, and we put very strict cash handling and procedures into place that have been recognized during our audit process for the last few years as best practice. We're very, very proud of those, but this is a global cash handling qualification. For the last 5 years, we've worked, and this is my colleague, Lauren Christie from Berman Fisher. I apologize for not introducing her earlier on. We've worked with the firm Berman Fisher, so we have formal accounting personnel doing our bookkeeping. We do not have an in-house bookkeeper for that reason. As the gallery moved into the new facility and increased in size and speed of revenue. Obviously, we have a gift shop, membership, workshops, etc. We wanted to make sure we were working with the very best qualification in terms of managing our accounts. I'm very pleased with the audits that we've had over the last few years, apart from this one qualification, which again is this global qualification for any charities that have donations.
The chairman, through you, and yeah, that was one of the issues that we recognize with all the charitable organizations. So you're correct in that regard. And one question which we had asked the Auditor General previously, and I guess for ease of your own, I guess, better understanding, the one question we had was, what would it take for this opinion to ever become qualified? Now, I'm looking in terms of the nature of your business and in terms of the amount of collections that you guys would have that would be non-governmental. And the question will be then, would you guys ever get an unqualified opinion? And I think it would be easier, I guess, coming from the Auditor General to say, because ultimately it has to be the opinion from our department. What would you guys have to do to get it become unqualified? Because I know it's going to be very difficult with the nature of your organization to ever get an unqualified opinion. So I think it's important for us to at least set the expectations from the public that at least there may be a government entity that will not get past this point because of where we are globally as a standard. I know there are many charitable organizations in Cayman that do not get an unqualified opinion for exactly the same reason. So if that is the case, I would leave that to the Auditor General to answer. And if you can't get it, you just can't get it.
Thank you, Honourable Member, through you, Mr. Chair. We've talked about this, and we talked about it in the context of the other two entities, and I absolutely agree with you. It is a really difficult qualification point to remove, because as auditors, we're required to be able to verify the accuracy of the revenue and the completeness of the revenue, and that is naturally very difficult in not-for-profit fundraising entities that handle a lot of cash. And we've talked about that with the other two witnesses as well as the gallery. CNCF have managed to remove that qualification. We talked as well with the museum about the things they were doing, including the camera and the cash box that Mr. Dunn was talking about. And if you look at the audit opinion, the 260, we know that the firm on the ground, so it's Eisner Amper that do this audit on our behalf, and we review the audit, and I ultimately sign off, so it is my audit, inevitably. But it says there that they're going to do a specific review of the criteria up front in this audit, because I think everybody here, we want to do the best we can to try and remove this qualification, because in every other respect, if you look, there aren't any issues in the ISO 260. We feel the entity is very well managed, and as we've heard, it is a very difficult area. Sorry, I don't know if Julius, who actually oversees the audit, wanted to add anything.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Looking at National Gallery actually is where we found the camera in place, which is really something that that we are looking to as a best practice, as a good practice. So when we get to the point of speaking with the auditors, we will surely follow up with them the status of this assessment that they will do up front.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. True, I think just for the benefit of the public, I think, and just touching back at what my colleague from Prospect raised before, the main issue then for the National Gallery is then pretty much a going concern issue in terms of the revenues and the associated expenses. So I think just as a kind of, I guess, to set the tone in terms of what we were looking for in the 2017 audit would be more on the revenue side, and I guess if it's not there, then more the management of expenses. But from an audit standpoint, we recognize that the nature of the business makes it very difficult to get an unqualified opinion. But so we don't want the public to believe thinking that it is mismanaged, but rather it's more a revenue issue. So just for the ease of everyone here and what it is that we'll be looking for in the 2017 audit, is pretty much around then the issue of it being able to sustain itself and not become a burden on the public purse.
Thank you. If I could speak to that through you, Mr. Chair. I'm very glad that you've brought this up because it does send the wrong message. We've actually been speaking with the Auditor General's Office for many years at this point to ask how we can remove this qualification. And we have built a management system accordingly to be best practiced within our organisation. I should also qualify that the cash that we handle is rather small in percentage when we're talking about the fundraising that we bring in every year. Most of that revenue is brought in directly from private firms or wire transferred, and we have a very clear system of tracking that, making sure that it's all put through point of sale. So if we're talking about donations boxes, can you remember exactly what the donations boxes are? Around $5,000 a year of cash handling on site. Obviously, that does not include the gift shop. And the procedure that we put into place in addition to the cameras is having 2 staff manage that counting at all times and then co-signing that and putting it through our point of sale system, which then goes directly to our accounting system. So we're very, very cautious about how this is managed. And we are very much hoping to be able to remove that qualification as well as a result of that good practice.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'm grateful for that statement. I refer to what the Auditor General refers to as the completeness of donations. It reads, the need for the gallery to demonstrate its ability to assert the completeness of donations and fundraising revenues reported on their financial statements. Now, not being an accountant myself, but certainly relying on the experience of my colleagues, that simply says to me that the Auditor General's and the Auditor General's Office requires more information on your financial statements as to where these revenues, donations are coming from, the creation of an audit trail perhaps. But you've just stated that whether it be your point of sale, whether it be your cash procedures, whether it be the installation of a security camera, it seems as if you are making the necessary changes as advised by the Auditor General's Office. Are you able to identify what recommendations have been made that you are unable to comply with in the first instance, and certainly to the Auditor General's Office? What more, in your anticipation, can the National Gallery do so that we can arrive at removing this qualification? In other words, how much more information would you require to prove the completeness of the revenue stated on their financial statements in order to be satisfied that the financial statements pass muster, so to speak?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. As I said just now, there is the one qualification point, and we've discussed how prevalent this is in this type of entity across the world. We're auditing to international auditing standards, and therefore we must be satisfied about the completeness of revenue. I mentioned in response to the last question that there are no ISO 260 points, which demonstrates, I think, a very high level of internal control and management within the gallery, and is commendable. And I mentioned that Eisner Ampner this year are going to look at the controls because we know measures have been put in place and we have, a good relationship to try and address this issue. So I think everything that could be done is being done, and again, without preempting the audit, because the work needs to be done and obviously other things may have changed. We feel, there is every chance that we'll be satisfied ultimately this year with the controls around revenue, particularly with the camera on the cash box and various other things. As I say, it may sound pedantic and petty, but you are auditing to agreed international standards, and that requires you to be certain around completeness of revenue. And it is a particular issue for this type of entity, as we've said, across the world. But we are optimistic, but without prejudging where the audit's going to take us.
Through Mr. Chairman, I think it's also important for the public to recognize that I've seen charitable organizations that accept no cash and still get this qualified opinion. So when you're looking for completeness of revenue, it doesn't have to do anything within cash collection. we have seen, and I'm speaking from experience, I haven't seen some of these. It has not to do with cash or anything. It's just a standard, and very few non-profits globally actually get a clean. So if this is the best, and this is why I said we wanted to set the expectations that barring the losses from the entity, I mean, it's not going to get anything better than this. I mean, that would probably be only the one issue. But this is standard language.
May I? Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could just
Yes.
speak to that as well.
Yeah, sure.
I think this is a really important conversation to be having so that the public are aware of the type of qualifications that charities have that do accept cash. And to point out again that our contribution from government is about 50-50. So we're very different from the National Museum, which is almost 100%, and the Culture Foundation, which is about 2/3 government support and some fundraising. So we have to bring in an enormous amount of revenue every year to stay in business. So we obviously do have a lot more connection to these fundraising events and donations. And that is why, to clarify, we haven't just put these good management practice structures into place in the last couple of years. They've been running for many years now. And I think it's important to point that out and to put it into context. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much, Ms. Urquhart, and for coming, and we look forward to working together to get it done as good as we can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
And the committee.
Well, we'll do that next year. Just one housekeeping thing with the committee. We received notice that the Legislative Assembly is planned to start a meeting on the, it's not for you, Ma'am, sorry, on the 14th of March. Can we have an admin meeting on March the 6th to review, because we have several reports that we need to table. We have the HSA, which is going to be a troubling one. Well, I write in it, so I ought to know. We have the government accounts, right? We have the major capital projects, right? So what I would try to do, working with the clerk between now and then and the AG's office, is to get the reports drafted. The meeting shouldn't be no longer than an hour, right? And then we can also do the invoices, etc. for the. Right. Okay. So the 6th of March, 10 o'clock is okay with everybody? Yes, sir. All right, okay. That's okay with you all? You only come if we got witnesses, though. You don't business with her. Okay, well, thank you all very much. See you all tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. and we're dealing with the Maritime Authority of the Cayman Islands.